All right, we're waiting. Oh, great. We got a couple more joining us and we should have a quorum. All right, we may have some more folks joining us late, but it looks like we do have a quorum for both our CJCC operations and executive committees. So Chris, whenever you're comfortable getting started, we're ready to go.
I was just thinking we should all dupe Krista and we should all just start moving our lips, but say nothing. And let her try to figure it out.
It'd be funny.
All right. I will call this meeting of the CJCC Executive Operations Committees to order. I think we probably don't need a roll call, but we do have a quorum, correct, Sarah?
That is correct.
All right. Looks like Chief Atkinson is up and taking nourishment. All right. Approval of the minutes from January 5th. I could have a motion for approval of those minutes.
So I'll move.
Katie, second.
Second.
Yep, Eric's got a second. Any discussion or corrections to those minutes? Otherwise, all those in favor of approving the minutes signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed, same sign. Motion carried. Okay, any public comment, Krista?
No public comment.
All right, we have no public comment. Then we will move on to actions to be taken by the committee. And the first is approval of our 2022 goals to recommend to the council, which will meet in when, Sarah? April?
Yep.
In April. So they would be approved by the full council at that point in time, assuming they pass this committee, these committees. And we did discuss these last month, but Sarah, do you want to do a quick summary? I mean, they're kind of self-explanatory, but nonetheless. Oh, you're muted, Sarah.
Oh, that's why no one's responding. I was just asking if you guys can see the slides that I have, just as far as just kind of walk us through this conversation here. So, right, we have at our last CJCC meeting in mid-January, we discussed goals for the year. And just we wanted kind of that discussion to take place at the council meeting. We had a little bit of a discussion, but really wanted to bring it back to this group to fine tune these goals to bring back to our April meeting. So what we really honed in on at the CJCC meeting was the first, to identify and implement effective strategies to combat methamphetamines in Dunn County. That really came out of our survey as a clear consensus goal for the year. The second proposed goal is to work with Menominee Police on their COSSUP grant. So that's the Comprehensive Opioid Stimulant and Substance Abuse Program. So the MPD received a multi-year grant to really move forward a number of prongs under the Project Hope initiative. And the third goal that came out of our CJCC conversation was really looking at some cross-system trainings that could really provide that foundation as far as evidence-based practices for us as a collective to really focus in each opportunity we can for a CJCC meeting to continue that education component. So I've got the next slide here, just really looking at maybe some suggested mission statements. And we also need to think about leadership of the groups. So Chris, maybe I'll pause here before I get too far in to see if these goals are, I mean, do we want to separate the actions out or do we want to combine them as far as the goals? Because on part B, we have mission statements and shares and whatnot.
I think it makes sense for us to review that these 3 goals for 2022 make sense or need adjustment or whatever, and then and take action on that, and then we can move on to the work groups and the mission statements.
Okay.
So I would entertain a motion to approve those 3 goals for 2022 and a second, and then we can discuss from there.
I'll move to approve the goals.
Moved by Judge Peterson, second.
I'll second that.
Second by Chair Bartlett. So discussion, is there anything anyone wishes to say with regard to those goals? Anything we've missed or we should consider in addition to them? Apparently everyone's muted.
Yeah, well, I just want to say, it seems like, we had a pretty good discussion about this, and it sounds like when you boil it down, those 3 overall goals, were identified, and I thought there was a pretty good consensus to focus on those things for 2022. So that's just my 2 cents worth.
Thank you. All right, well, if there is no one else who has any comment with regard to those goals, then all of those in favor of approving those 3 goals for 2022 signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed, same sign. Though that motion would carry. So now our next one is to look at the proposed work groups and mission statements and talk about chairs for those committees, potentially to develop committees, work groups for those goals.
Okay, so, this is just a rough starting place as far as the purpose statement or mission statements. The methamphetamine strategies group, so I pluralized strategy to strategies. So that was something that is a little bit different than our agenda. So really looking to identify and implement effective strategies to combat methamphetamines. Combat is kind of a action word, kind of there's a connotation that comes with that. This is beyond treatment. So this is really looking across the board at law enforcement treatment programs, really what we can do to really hone in on that methamphetamine problem, that persistent problem that we're seeing in our community. And then so really identifying potential courses of action, and then look to implement those strategies, whether it's in the jail, in the community, with human services, with law enforcement. So it's a pretty broad group. There is some more technical assistance that's available. Chris and I have been able to take part in that. And it seems to be a good time to really hone in on this persistent problem, as I stated before. As far as the chair, I'm not sure who wants to kind of step up to lead this, and maybe we want to have a kind of a co-chair for this purpose. And I think the members of this work group would really come out of the chairs, and depending on the focus and the topics, the membership could kind of ebb and flow based on who's leading the group and what the agendas are for this group. So I'm going to pause for discussion on that one.
So I believe last month when we talked about this, we had some persons who had identified interest in being on these work groups, correct, Sarah? Do you have that?
Yes. So yep, we've got, well, I think we proposed that Andrea, our DA, would be part of that group. Sheriff Bigged offered up to be part of that group. And then I think Eric, you also offered up to be part of that group. Jim and Chris, I think you have also were interested in being part of that group.
I'm a lame duck, of course, and won't be around after March. So depending on who takes over as chair of Judiciary and Law, you're going to have some new blood in the group. So that's a factor to consider as well. I would have no objection to continuing in some manner in this effort, but obviously it would not be as the chair of Judiciary and Law, nor as a supervisor for Dunn County.
We would gladly have you.
We're going to miss you.
Absolutely. So I guess one suggestion that I thought about in anticipation of this meeting was perhaps to, Sarah, for you and I to work together on the first meeting of these work groups, getting them scheduled, getting the players, and then have as a first agenda item, sort of appointing the leadership or identifying the leadership. I think it might be helpful for us to spend a little bit of time sort of sorting out where we're starting from in the work groups, and then someone would be a little clearer on what their leadership might need in terms of a time commitment. I think people sometimes believe that it's a little bit more daunting than it turns out to be, because Sarah is a great organizer behind the scenes to pull off all of this stuff, and being a chair really oftentimes simply means that you need to work with Sarah to just get a meeting scheduled and facilitate the meeting. So, but I think that we could probably accomplish that at the first meeting of each of those work groups, if that would be okay with everyone.
Sounds like a good plan. Like
I
a
was gonna
jury
say-
picking the presiding juror.
Yeah,
I'm also willing to participate in the work group if needed. I know I'm more data purposes and numbers, but if you guys need me, just feel free to let me know and I'm more than happy to help.
awesome. Thank you, Katie.
Okay.
Absent any objection, then Sarah and I will go ahead, assuming that both of these work groups become work groups. Go ahead and we will just get them off the ground and then work towards the leadership at the first meeting.
Regarding the COSUP grant work group, I did hit up Eric to see if he would be interested in leading this group. And of course, he never shies away from an opportunity to lead a group. So he was willing to chair. And I think that makes sense, especially with that agency being the lead grant holder for the COSUP work group. But I think that's another one that, depending on the area of topic and focus and the timeline, there could be different players at the table for that group as well. Looks like Andrea just joined us, which is great.
Okay. So if we've dealt with so I think I need a motion. Guess we're doing this sort of backwards because I probably should add a motion first. Let's do a motion to create the work groups. I guess we could, let's do a motion to create the work groups and identify the mission approve the mission statements. We'll do a second, then we'll do discussion and take that part, I think, is the proper process. So, talking to myself, I would entertain a motion to create these two work groups and set the mission statements.
Also move.
Chair Bartlett, second. Jim's got a second. All right. So now if you would take a look at the mission statements and see if they make sense for those groups. Any wordsmithers? That's probably not even the right word.
The word millers.
Word millers? All right, well, then I would ask all those in favor of creating these 2 work groups and adopting the mission statements as set forth, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Hi.
All right, opposed, same sign. That motion carries. And then we would continue our executive and operation committee meetings. And then we have these other kind of identified areas of focus that continue as needed or are looped in as needed to support the work of the CJCC and or these 2 new committees or work groups. All right. Then, so I don't know that we need an action item on the drug endangered children because that already exists, right? Okay. All right, so our next action item is recommendation for judiciary and law on pending legislation and constitutional amendment, and then all of the associated numbers to the Assembly and Senate bills. Someone willing to make a motion? On that action item.
Chris, can we hear from particularly the judges, I guess, but anybody else that has information? I have a couple of reactions. And if possible, maybe we could take the constitutional amendment separately from the legislative items because it's a significantly different procedure. Generally speaking, I think it's a bad idea to have a constitutional amendment based on a particular incident. So I don't like constitutional amendments, generally speaking, unless they're well thought out. And I think the Marcy's Law example shows us that there are some pitfalls for behaving too hastily in those directions. But in general, I've spent some time looking at this. It's been all over public radio the last couple of days. Can we get some reaction on if these legislative items were to pass, notwithstanding the constitutional amendment, what would that mean in practical terms, both generally statewide and in our particular case?
For the constitutional amendment or for the bills?
Well, they're kind of tied, but either or both or a question I've had in my mind is that in the constitutional amendment, it spells out a number of circumstances that a judge must consider when considering bail. As a judge, does that mean that that's designed to be an exhaustive list? So for example, if there are factors that need to be considered other than the ones listed, would that constitutional amendment or the legislation make it more difficult for a judge to consider things that were not talked about, family and social situations, for example? And I'm just really unclear about, I'm unclear about the entire process, but the whole thing strikes me as being hasty.
Well, let me just weigh in. Just a little bit of a qualification here. First of all, I mean, it would be, as far as any sort of resolutions or trying to push for any position or anything, I don't think that would be appropriate for us as judges. But informationally, I think it's very appropriate for us to share, because this is something that we deal with on almost a daily basis. If you're the intake judge, it's the rare day that we don't have a jail appearance. Now, the way the state constitution is now, court cannot impose monetary conditions of bail unless it's reasonably necessary to assure their appearance in court. when I first became judge, had been sort of frustrated with the way that the bail and bond laws work, and actually started talking to some legislators about changing the statute to allow us to use cash bail to assure compliance with non-monetary conditions of bond. You know, if there's a concern for dangerousness and it's a new arrest, you know, I think judges right now are really limited to, well, you know, ensure their appearance in court. However, you know, sometimes we get into some tortured logic and whatnot, you know, in order to justify, I think it happens everywhere to some extent, to do that with what is, you know, to kind of push the envelope on the state constitution a bit. And often judges are, you know, criticized for bail decisions. You know, we do have a problem with non-compliance with bond conditions in many circumstances, and the law does allow us to order non-monetary conditions of bond, you know, reasonably, you know, for the factors that could be considered under this constitutional amendment. I would have worded it a little bit differently back then. It would have said, well, that we can only require monetary conditions of bond reasonably necessary to assure appearance in court and compliance with, you know, non-monetary conditions of bond. So so it's worded a little bit differently. And in the constitutional amendment, frankly, I think is a good idea. I think it's long overdue. What we do right now here locally is when we have somebody who shows up for court, but they continue to commit violations and they're arrested for bail jumping repeatedly, is that the state is now moving to increase the bail, which is provided for. It's both constitutional and provided for by the statutes. But you have to wait till somebody's violated those conditions in order to do that. And, you know, it'd be a lot easier. Again, you know, you got, say you got a fourth offense OWI and the person's arrested for a fifth offense OWI in a situation where you're really concerned about, you know, they're a danger to the public. So, but they've made all their court dates, let's say, then we got to go back and deal with what they're out on bond for, where it would be a lot easier just to deal with the new case and be able to consider such things as public safety, the community, individuals, as well as the community in general. So, you know, you say you've got a stalking situation and, you know, the person's confident they're going to show up in court. They're local. They've showed up in court in the past, but, you know, they compulsively violating no contacts, restraining orders or whatever. You know, it'd be nice to be able to have the option to use cash bail to assure safety of a particular individual. Now, that's about all I've got to say. I think the constitutional amendment is a good idea. However, it would take 2 legislative sessions and then a vote from the public to do that. I think many people believe that we can do that now. And that's been sort of, you know, created a misunderstanding that, you know, judges get criticized for bail decisions often by law enforcement. And I've found that law enforcement, they often don't really truly understand, you know, what we're trying to uphold our oath, right? Trying to abide by the Constitution. Now, the statutes, the proposed changes to statutes, let me back up. I believe that the constitutional amendment, if that was approved, that it would be consistent with the U.S. Constitution, Amendment 6, no excessive bail, as interpreted in a couple of U.S. Supreme Court decisions. So I think that would be, you know, individualized decision, taking into consideration a number of factors. And I don't think there would really be a limit on the factors we could take into consideration. Now, moving to those statutes, the one size fits all, I think would probably not be constitutional under the U.S. Constitution. And it certainly they wouldn't be constitutional now under our state constitution. And the effect of, okay, so there's 2 bills, one in the Assembly and the Senate, that would require there to be $10,000 cash bail or an appearance bond with sufficiently solvent surety in the like amount minimum. So that would be someone gets arrested for disorderly conduct if they have a prior conviction for possession of methamphetamine, for example, then $10,000 cash bail, or operating after revocation, possession of drug paraphernalia, all these things which now would be relatively minor. And it would work a tremendous disparity between, the poor and working poor, who we deal with a lot, who wouldn't be able to afford these high cash bails. And I think there's a very good likelihood it could cause the jail population, pretrial jail population to swell. I talked with the sheriff, it was last week before last, but the current population was around 64. And, we had to try to keep track of our pretrial people that are in jail in lieu of posting bail. And we have like 27 at my last count this month, somewhere like 27 to 30, somewhere in that neighborhood. That number, I almost, for sure would go way up. I don't know how many people have prior felony convictions, but I hear about it a lot.
If I can interject
Number of
quickly.
misdemeanors. What's that?
If I can just interject quickly, we did do a data scan for March 2021 and March 2019, just to look who would be impacted on this as far as the individuals that were booked in jail and held for a bond hearing. And interestingly, both of them came back at 63% of the individuals that were booked would be held on a $10,000 cash bond. So our jail population would definitely would swell. And then we also look with the other one with the bonds, and we see approximately 37 to 45% would be held on a $5,000 cash bond with prior bail jumping. So the data, just a quick little snapshot, shows that we would have a major impact on our jail population pre-trial.
And it would put a lot of pressure on trying to get speedy trials. It would be logistically, it could be very expensive and very difficult to comply. And here's just one thing to keep in mind right now. If you have someone in custody, pre-trial or serving a sentence, and they have to be hospitalized or have medical problems or whatever, the county has to pay for that. And, it's not unusual that, a signature bond might be authorized for somebody, who needs some medical care that would be very expensive, so that we don't have to pay for it. So from that standpoint, I don't think it'd make a big difference for a little while, but ultimately, we'd have no safety valve, no way to, get around that. And then we'd also probably have to have a lot of hearings to see whether the sufficiently solvent surety was sufficiently solvent. And I'm not exactly sure what they're talking about there in terms of an appearance bond. So that process would have to be ironed out. It could take up a lot of time as well, because I'm sure a lot of people would want to try to get out because they can't post a 10,000. And then in the other bills with the prior bail jumping conviction, that would be 5,000 cash bond or appearance bond. So those are and they also have in there, I think, something about a board or collect data for every bail decision or bond decision a judge makes, who the judge is and the charges and all that. And so I don't have any problem with that, but that's part of it. So that's just my take on it. So I don't know, Judge Meyer, if you had anything you wanted to add on that.
Well, I agree mostly with the thing about the keeping track of the judges. They're talking like a CCAP program. And I'm wondering where the funding is going to come for paying for that. I mean, that's an expensive proposition, but, as a resident, not as a judge, I more worry about the $5,000 and the $10,000 for people who haven't been convicted of these crimes that they're being held on, and it's pre-trial. So, and I think that our system would be overwrought with bail bond hearings, those type of things.
Sarah, did this recommendation come from? Did the recommendation for a recommendation come from, or did it from somewhere, or did it come to make it be an action item?
Yeah, so this was kind of brought to my attention through Judge Peterson, and County Manager Miller and myself met with Judge to kind of discuss these bills and kind of discuss a route of how this might, the county might express their opinion on this, to really discuss it here at the CJCC level. And if there's any action that we would want to recommend to the Judiciary and Law Committee, then we could do that for their consideration. I did reach out to WCA on this issue. We're part of the Justice and Public Safety group. They did register formal opposition to these bills, largely going back to the minimum requirements. And they saw this as a significant impact on counties. And the fiscal estimates that the Legislative Bureau put out really do put the expense on the counties, and it's indeterminate. So that's that was a clear area for them to make action on. So WCA has did some action on that. Regarding the constitutional amendment, from what I understand, that passed yesterday. So it will have to go through a whole nother legislative session to be heard. So there's more time, but WCA has not done anything formal on that, but it looks like they are not necessarily in support of that constitutional amendment because it is not necessarily consistent with some of the kind of the expertise out there as far as what we should be doing. It sounds like an improvement, but it's not a solution. And it might be done in haste, as Supervisor Tripp kind of mentioned.
So the question on kind of to this group then is there any will to bring forward some recommendation to Judiciary and Law regarding the pending legislation? Correct?
Can I ask a question?
Yes, please.
It seems like the legislation and the constitutional amendment are kind of a broad array of issues that it might not be appropriate for us to take a position on either for or against at this point. But is it possible that we could simply issue a statement of what we do believe to be true, important, and significant to the county? Judge Peterson and Judge Meyer both made a couple of points that I think are worth sharing in terms of the cost to the county, although the state is flush with cash, so I'm sure they'd help us out on that. I'm pretty sure they would. But seriously, there is something to be said for establishing a process of keeping a person in custody if they pose a risk to society. I mean, that's a real point, and it's valid and legitimate. On the other hand, I think there are pieces of the legislation and the constitutional amendment that border on unconstitutional, that really put an undue onus on poor people, and our county's full of them. So these are broad and difficult and complicated issues. And my initial reaction to the legislation and the constitutional amendment is that people were trying to fix them real quick because they were pissed about something. So back to my original point, rather than taking a position in favor or opposed to the legislation, is it possible that we could simply issue issue a statement of our beliefs about what we think bail ought to be for, how it ought to be administered, what we feel is fair and also protects the public? Could we do that?
As the CJCC?
Yeah.
Okay.
And offer it. I mean, if it has to go through Judiciary and Law, we'd be happy to handle it there as well. But rather than taking a position for or against the legislation, I think a statement like that would make it fairly clear what parts we like and what parts maybe we don't like so much.
And I was just trying to ferret out a little bit about where would that statement go to? Whom would we provide that to?
Maybe all resolutions that are passed by county board, we share those with our elected legislature and the governor and the media. And sometimes it's simply a statement of this is where we stand, because resolutions are just that. It's our statement of good intentions, I guess. Resolutions don't have any power of other than making a statement about what we believe to be true and important.
So you would be proposing taking a resolution through judiciary law and the board and forwarding it out in the usual manner to the powers that be regarding Dunn County's kind of statement of belief.
Yeah, if that's
Yep.
appropriate, that would
Okay.
make sense. I can't think of, and maybe Chairman Bartlett or Mr. Miller can enlighten me. I don't know that there's another avenue that we could take other than a resolution of some kind or a statement of some kind.
Others thoughts about that?
I think that's the best way to do it is for the county board to pass a resolution if they feel strongly about one issue or another. I don't know if I'd like to know why you don't think the CJCC should have issue an opinion on this, Jim. Is it because you think that we should stay more neutral as a CJCC, or why? I mean, this is the group that these laws affect. Why shouldn't we take an issue, or is it because the judges are here and the sheriff, they're elected? I'm wondering why, for sure.
Yeah, and apparently I wasn't real clear about this. I think the CJCC does have and should have and ought to publicize our opinion on these things. What I don't think would be helpful at this point is to take a position in favor or in opposition to any particular bill, because I think the bills and the constitutional amendment were written in haste. I don't think that the people that produced those were very thoughtful about it. And at this time, I don't think it would be useful for us to come out in opposition to a bill that later might be amended to something we could support. But a general statement of principles, I think, is appropriate and would express the opinion of CJCC. And I would be most happy to take that up at Judiciary and Law as well. And I think the county board would appropriately, if they were to support a resolution like that, that would be an appropriate statement of the feeling of the county board.
Okay, thank you.
Most of the opinions out there is this would not pass the governor's desk any which way, but that there might not be a vocal response to it. So it's kind of unclear how this legislation might play out. It is on the calendar potentially for this month for both the Assembly and the Senate for discussion, but with time crunches, they don't always get to everything. And but on the flip side, I was told that sometimes they kind of barrel through a whole lot of stuff quickly. So those are just some additional factors.
Eric?
Yeah, I got a question. This is probably for the judges and the DA. If this legislation did pass, just from looking at it, it appears that we would have a significantly increased population of people in our jail due to some of that, if they have previous bail jumpings or certain felonies. Am I incorrect in that assumption?
That's correct. And actually also there's a number of misdemeanors. They're called violent misdemeanors. They're listed under 941-29. And we've broken out and made a list of those, but there's quite a few of those misdemeanors as well. But yeah, and either that, and again, it'd either be mandatory cash bail, depending on the circumstances, or the appearance bond with a sufficiently solvent surety. So someone is going to be good for the money. So, but if you have enough money, you can just post out, right?
Yeah, this sounds to me pretty unfair towards people who are indigent. I get trying to keep dangerous people off the street, and I think our system still can do that. It's in the hands of recommendations from the DA and the judge, and I feel like this is not going to be of great benefit overall.
Andrea, did you have thoughts?
So, I mean, my thoughts are the bill regarding bail jumping and a violent, I mean, there's no way, a prior violent conviction, I mean, there's just no way they're going to pass the governor's desk. So I don't think we should even bother addressing those, other than, I mean, I guess I'll leave that up, but that's not going anywhere. In my opinion, to me, the constitutional amendment is long overdue. I've been having these bail arguments in front of Judge Peterson since he's taken the bench, and he's been asking for a constitutional amendment for years and years. And so I do think that there's a public misconception about what judges can do regarding bond. And I think the constitutional amendment, while not perfect, is a right step and a big step in the right direction. As it is written, it is whether a person's going to appear in court or not. It's not whether this is violent, it's whether they're going to appear. And I think the way it's written is not in favor of protection of the public and criminal history and other factors that the court should be considering. So I do think it's beneficial for the CJCC to take a position with respect to the constitutional amendment.
Thank you. So hearing all of that conversation, is there someone that's has a clear path to a recommendation or a motion for action? Or how would you like to move forward as a group? This is the part where you guys talk.
Are we talking about no action here? Just to follow up with what Andrea said, the proposed amendment or the legislation might be a moot point. WCA is taking that up. It's not expected to pass. Regarding the constitutional amendment, that is moving forward. There is support for that. So that might be something. We have time. This one isn't time sensitive. It's going to be through a whole nother session. But for us to put together a statement for the Judiciary and Law Committee to consider. But again, I don't think it needs to be in haste because it's already in motion. So those are just some thoughts.
So one potential course of action would be that, Sarah, you could work with those of interest in addressing the issue relating the constitutional amendment and put some draft language together that would help to frame what it would be that the CJCC would be supporting or in opposition to. Does that seem, and then that could come back for a future meeting? Is that a strong enough course of action given the time frame? Hearing no opposition, I'd suggest we go with that. So we would be taking no action at this point with the moving forward something to judiciary law, but coming back to this group with something that could then be forwarded. All right, and then final action item is a letter of support for the DOJ grant for medication assisted treatment in jail. Sarah, do you want to speak to that?
So as I mentioned, Sheriff Big couldn't join us today, but he has put in a request to see if the CJCC would be interested in spearheading a grant opportunity to bring medically assisted treatment into jail. This is a state grant opportunity, they're going to be issuing 9 awards to really look at that, bringing that treatment support into the jail prior to release and doing some care coordination on the backside. So certainly with our reentry program, it fits in with that. This is something that our Stepping Up work group has kind of worked on for a number of years and really clearly saw this as an advantage that we would have by offering that into the jail. So the sheriff is interested in this grant. He would, asked us to put it on for discussion. So I offered that I could write the grant and kind of coordinate and pull the group together to put a proposal together. There's no county match at all. And it's up to $125,000 starting in April through September of 2023. So it can be used for personnel, contracts, transitional housing, but there are a couple of musts, and we must be able to provide that medical assisted treatment in jail and to offer evidence-based, cognitive-based therapy in jail and to do some care coordination. So it certainly makes sense with what we've already been working on with reentry. And now that the sheriff's interested in this, I would be in support and glad to put some efforts toward it.
So you are looking for endorsement of this group to a motion for endorsement of this group to move forward with the application for the DOJ grant, as well as supporting a letter of support from this group for that grant application. Is that correct, Sarah?
Yes.
Okay. There's someone who would be
I
willing
move
to.
that we do what Chris said.
All right, second? Second by Chair Bartlett. All right. Any other discussion? All those in favor of supporting that motion could signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign, motion carries. Okay, 2022 grants, Sarah.
Okay, so we have a couple of grants that had remaining funding in 2021 that is in the process of being carried over for 2022. So we have some reentry funds that will be viable through June 30th. And then we also have the coronavirus emergency supplemental funding for the courthouse. So we did a number of purchases last year with some sanitation devices and the filtration system, but we still have the digital evidence system is outstanding. And then the laptops for the squads were supposed to be delivered months and months ago. I guess they were on a ship somewhere out in the ocean. So those are still remaining to be implemented. In regards to the digital evidence system, kind of recap, there's a couple of different systems, there's pros and cons, but I think that's something that we're going to have to, some decisions are going to have to be made on that. Otherwise, we're going to lose the funding opportunities. So that's just something that I'm hoping to kind of gain commitment from our leaders here on continuing the reentry efforts. Finishing up that the CSEF grant and getting that digital evidence system in place. And then we did receive our new award for the TAD grant. So that'll continue as is for 2022. So just kind of a statement, but hoping that we can get some commitment. And Andrea, I'll connect with you and perhaps we'll get some meetings on the calendar with our law enforcement partners and IT to really come down to a decision in regards to the digital evidence system. That's okay.
So,
Sir, when does that grant funding end then? Or what's our deadline?
That one was also extended through June 30th of 22.
So I believe that in our discussion, ours being Sarah and Andrea and I, in preparation for this meeting, I believed that we were, and I appreciate that the sheriff's not here, but we were hoping to kind of have a discussion about the kind of the obstacles to this process and then make some decisions about that. But we can certainly articulate that with the sheriff and try to bring some resolution. But our hope was to have resolution of decision regarding the system that would be utilized by March so that there was time for implementation of the system. So let the minutes reflect. All right, input to the CJCC 2021 report.
All right, so annual report time. The CJCC will be presenting in March to the county board. We've got a format that we've been using the last several years, and I can share that if needed, but really just wanting input, really looking at covering all the things that we tackled in 2021 and some of the changes. We had some structural changes. We kind of did some different efforts in 2021. One thing that I would like to include is the Smash board, but I still have some outstanding data from the DA's office on the Smash board for December. But I think that continuing our annual data reporting to the county board is also helpful. So just wondering if there's anything, in hindsight, anything that you'd like to see differently as far as that report to the county board. From what I understand, Paul, it's not going to be a narrative. It's just really providing the written report and being available to answer any questions. Last year, the report was about 64 pages long. It was pretty exhaustive. Had a couple of addendums on it. But it does kind of chronicle all of our activities, our membership, our structural changes, and where we spent our efforts and time and funds.
I would just offer, Sarah, that I think that, and we've talked about this in previous years, but I truly believe that one of the benefits of the CJCC at this point in its maturity and development has been that ability to have the right people regularly together enough to be able to move quickly when opportunities arise for funding or changes within the system. So for instance, this medication assisted treatment grant let out in early February, due at the end of the month, the sheriff having the contacts to reach out and say, hey, I'm interested in doing this. The groundwork to have been laid really over the last decade regarding the importance of MAT in jail. And so I think sometimes at this point, because we don't have these like huge shiny projects all of the time, I still believe that there's a boatload of activities that happen and that we should maybe do the best job that we can to kind of pull those together. So I think about, Sarah, for instance, your work with the housing action team for Health Done Right, and us looking at some substance use prevention advertising kinds of stuff. Chair Bartlett as well is on that group. I look at, and I mean, I know that they're not like directly, but you are the representative of the CJC for those activities. I think about the the things that you've mentioned here, the evidence system, and some of the other opportunities that have arisen as a result of COVID. I mean, like that is directly saving the county a pile of money with regard to those laptops and that evidence system. And some of the work that's happened with regard to housing, and your group, you're working with the transitional housing group. So there's just a lot of like, not necessarily these huge projects, but lots of activities that are happening that are really the maturity of this organization. Anything else that people think it is important that Sarah includes? It's a very talkative group today. And then Sarah has a written staff report. Anything that you want to emphasize out of that report, Sarah?
No, I'd just be happy to entertain any questions.
All right. And, oh, we would note that we have transitioned our family treatment court leadership from Judge Peterson to Judge Meyer. So does that mean that Judge Peterson's back on adult treatment court?
He has been the whole time.
He's had both. And
Yeah.
so now he's adult and Judge Meyer is the family treatment court. So that was a nice change.
I'd like to
Broadening the,
bug out for my next meeting. I did a chat, but I don't think I sent it.
oh,
Anyway, we'll see you later. Family
all
or
right.
treatment court meeting, noon.
All
Have a
right.
great day.
Thanks,
Bye-bye.
Jim. All right, our next meeting will be on March 2nd, correct?
Yes, so it is coming up here in just a couple of weeks. There was a conflict on the February 2nd, so we went with the 16th here. So,
Oh, okay.
um,
So do we need a March?
we could defer it to April 6th, meet then, and then we're ahead of the CJCC on the 14th. Would be an
That gives
option.
some time for action for the looking at that potential resolution on the constitutional amendment, gets the action or the newly formed committee or work groups opportunity to meet, unless someone else can think of something, some compelling reason for us to meet again in 2 weeks.
Yeah, that's a pretty tight turnaround.
I don't know that there's anything compelling about that.
Mhm.
All right, then we will look at our meeting on, what did you say, April who?
April 6th.
April 6th. All right. Anything else for the good of the group? Otherwise, we